Good evening, everyone.
You're on mute, Ms. Faison.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our second Wellness Wednesday session for parents. This evening session is on students' mental health matters. We have a host of panelists and a presentation that you will hear from tonight, and that includes students and community agencies who support our students' mental health in PGCPS. You will be hearing from them later, but first, I'd like to introduce our new mental health coordinator, Ms. Emily Pasco, who will provide a presentation to you first on what mental health is.
Good evening, and thank you all so much for being here. I know everybody's schedule is very packed and everyone's very busy, but we are appreciative that you understand the importance of this topic. We took the feedback that some of you gave from the bullying prevention and reporting presentation in August. A lot of you were concerned about mental health and wanted to hear more about it and a discussion. So that is why we are here tonight. And we are very excited to tell you about how Prince George's County Public Schools is addressing student mental health, some of the stressors that students experience, and overcoming some barriers to receiving mental health support. So thank you again for being here. Excuse me. And also thank you to the Board of Education for allowing us to put this presentation and this discussion together. And Spanish interpretation is available. And I don't know if one of the interpreters wants to say more about that.
Sí,
but just
I will. Buenas tardes. Estamos diciendo que los servicios de interpretación están disponibles para todos los participantes. La interpretación simultánea está disponible por la parte baja de la pantalla. Hay un globo. Necesita hacer clic en el globo y elegir Spanish para que pueda escuchar todo en español.
Thank you so much, Dr. Love. So our objectives tonight are to overview mental health, discuss what mental health is, some of the common misconceptions, and also discuss what mental illness is. We'll also discuss some stressors that are experienced by Prince George's County Public School students and students across the nation, some warning signs for suicide, discuss some of the resources available through Prince George's County Public Schools, and we will also have an expert panel, as Dr. Faison said, with staff members from Prince George's County Public Schools, in addition to community resources and community partners that we have. And hopefully we'll have some time for a question and answer portion to address some of your concerns and your questions. So to start out, mental health, has received a lot of attention nationwide, and Prince George's County has recognized that this is a critical need for our students and parents, and Dr. Goldson addresses it through the strategic framework, particularly in outcome goal number 4, which states the goal is to increase awareness of mental health and wellness linkages to learning by eliminating stigmas, increasing access to supports, and decreasing the number of avoidable adverse outcomes. So part of the way that we decrease stigma is to have ongoing conversations about mental health. So that's a huge piece of why we're here tonight. And I hope that you take something from this tonight and you learn something and you can discuss with other parents, with your students, with the individuals that you work with regarding mental health in general and what that means for our students and how to support that. So what is mental health? And I think there are still some misconceptions based on, the stigma that has been around for a long time that we're still overcoming. So mental health refers to our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. So it's basically how we function day to day. It affects how we think, how we feel, and how we act, and determines how we handle stress, relate to others, whether it's our family members, people in the community, or complete strangers, and how we make choices. So a lot of people think mental health is synonymous it with mental illness, and that's simply not true. Mental health, I think it's helpful to consider it on a continuum. It can fluctuate from day to day, ranging from thriving to in a crisis. So we'll talk about the different ranges and the different categories of mental health and how to support student mental health and your own mental health as parents and community members as well. We know mental health is just as important and nuanced as our physical health. If we don't address it, if we don't take care of it, then it will impact major aspects of our lives. So a mental illness is a category within mental health, and that refers to a diagnosable illness that affects a person's thinking or emotional state and behavior. And what a lot of people have questions about, when does something go into the category of mental illness? And to get that answer, you need to talk to a mental health professional about your specific situation. Only a mental health professional can determine that. But it does disrupt a person's ability to work or attend school, carry out daily activities such as taking care of personal hygiene, eating, sleeping, and engaging in satisfying relationships. So once it affects those three areas, that's when we might consider that it has gone into the realm of mental illness. So some of the misconceptions, one of the main misconceptions of mental illness is that it's rare. However, data that we have from 2016 to 2019 are that 10% of youth aged 3 to 17 are diagnosed with ADHD, almost 10% with anxiety, and 8.9% with behavior problems. These include conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder, and 4.4% of individuals aged 3 to 17 had depression. And you might see that this data is from 2016 to 2019. Often mental health data lags a few years behind. It takes us a little while to get the newer data. So of course, we're expecting these numbers to be even higher following the COVID-19 pandemic, and given how all of our daily lives were significantly disrupted from that pandemic. So we have some early data showing the impact of COVID-19, but in the next couple of years, we'll likely see these numbers increase and see more concerns with regard to mental health in the nation data. However, this really highlights that mental health was approaching a crisis point prior to the pandemic. So this is from the CDC, and this indicates mental health and suicide behaviors amongst high school age students. So we saw a 10% increase in a pervasive feeling of sadness and hopelessness. When we talk about persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness, that's typically about 2 weeks of consistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness that significantly affect their daily lives. So a 10% increase in that from 2009 to 2019, about a 5% increase in seriously considering attempting suicide for high school students. More students, about 5% more students made a suicide plan. Also an increase of about 2.5% of attempted suicide, and about a 1% increase in students that were injured in a suicide attempt. So pretty alarming increases in all of these behaviors and thoughts. So again, to point to the fact that mental illness it's not as rare as a lot of people think it is. It's much more common, especially now from 2019. Another misconception is that mental illness is always lifelong. And it is true that there are some mental illnesses that people will carry with them throughout their lives, but those people can still receive treatment and can live meaningful lives with their mental illness. And also for a lot of mental illnesses, individuals can take medication or receive therapy for a short period of time to get through that particular stressor, and then be okay and have the skills that they need to continue on their daily lives. And the fact is, research has shown that as sooner an individual gets help, the more likely they are to have a positive outcome, the more likely they are to not need counseling in the future for that same problem. Another misconception is that a person needs to be in crisis to receive help. Whereas if you're in a crisis position, if it's escalated to the point of a crisis, the help will likely need to be more intense. But there are several things that we can do to prevent problems from progressing to disorders and crisis situations. So that involves mental health education, which is why we're here today, building of coping skills. So coping skills, it's a broad category of things that basically just make you feel better. So there's some common ones that we recommend for everybody as mental health professionals, such as deep breathing, breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth slowly, counting to 10. Those are very general coping skills. And there's also coping skills that are unique to the individual. I recently watched Selena Gomez's documentary, My Mind and Me, where she talks about her experience with mental illness. She's many celebrities and people in the industry have come out regarding their experiences with mental illness. And she's been involved in talking with President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris to increase education in schools on mental health. And I watched her documentary, and one thing that stuck out with me was she said, when you're struggling with your mental health, the essential part of it is knowing what to do. And that really spoke to me, and knowing what your coping skills are, what your students' coping skills are, is essential, as well as finding resources, which we'll talk about later. But one of her coping skills was she went back and she connected with people that she grew up with. She connected with people that she knew before she had all of the stress of fame and being in the spotlight. So that was her main coping skill, and that's what worked for her. Some other people may rely on their faith for coping, or exercise, or more creative outlets. So it's really about knowing what works for you specifically. And I think that's part of what's difficult about growing up is a lot of our students, especially the younger students, are still figuring that out. They're still getting to know themselves and what works to make them feel better. So building of coping skills and helping students to realize what their unique coping skills are is essential. Check-ins with trusted adults, whether that's with a coach, a teacher, a parent, a grandparent, aunt, uncle, can be anybody that's an adult that knows what they're going through and can talk to them about it. Also is a key protective factor in mental health. Sleep hygiene, we know that adolescents require about 9 to 10 hours of sleep every night. And just the fact is that most adolescents are not getting near that amount of sleep. But continuing to reiterate those sleep habits, such as decreasing screen time prior to going to bed, and whatever, creating your sleep environment that makes it conducive to a good night's sleep is essential for mental health, as well as strong links in the research between physical activity and mental health, and also practicing gratitude. This can be as simple as writing or thinking or saying 3 things every day that you're grateful for has a significant link to mental health. So practicing gratitude in your daily lives can be a protective factor. Some of the common concerns that students in Prince George's County experience, and these are all taken from data from our mental health clinicians for referrals that they receive. So the number one concern is depression, followed by anxiety, conflicts with others, whether it's peers or teachers, trauma or negative life events, anger, grief, aggression, whether that's physical aggression or verbal aggression, difficulty with impulse control, self-esteem or confidence in, issues, suicidal ideation, and self-harm. Those were the main things that our youth are experiencing as of so far this school year. So when to seek help? So this can be challenging for many people because many things about growing up and about adolescence are typical, such as mood dysregulation, frequent mood swings. Those are typical things in adolescence. However, we want to consider the severity of the presenting problem, how much that deviates from typical adolescent development, how often it occurs, how intense, and how long it occurs for. So any of the presenting problems, and we said for depression, typically about 2 weeks, is significant. That's a significant, persistent feeling of sadness. Difficulty significantly affects one or more major life areas. So this can include academic, social, family relationships, difficulty with eating whether it's significantly more or significantly less than the youth is typically, and as well as sleeping. So significant changes that affect one or more areas of major life functioning, and also consider the severity of the problem and how much it disrupts their daily lives. And we'll talk more about how to seek help through the panel. So what is a mental health crisis? So something escalates to a crisis when there's severe disruptive behavior, when the disruptive behavior, when it conflicts with the individual's ability to engage in daily life tasks, and when it affects other people engage in daily life tasks. Significant aggressive or threatening behaviors, self-injurious behaviors, acute psychosis, so that would be hallucinations, whether it's hearing or seeing things that are not there. That would be a crisis point, especially if it's the youth's first psychotic episode. That can be very scary for the youth and trigger a crisis. Suicidal thoughts and threats to harm self or others, and suicidal attempts. Those are all things that constitute a mental health crisis and warrant significant attention immediately. Some of the warning signs for suicide are individuals talking about wanting to die, to discussing feeling great guilt or shame about something that they did or did not do, and expressing that they feel like a burden or on someone or a group of people. So making comments like, my family would be so much better off if I wasn't here. I feel worthless, nobody cares. Comments like that indicate that a student might be considering suicide. Feelings that you observe, feelings of emptiness, hopelessness, feeling trapped, and so not being able to see past the current crisis is a warning sign. So if the youth is going through something and they can't see how it will resolve, that's a significant concern. Or expressing no reason to live. They might seem extremely sad or more anxious than they usually are. Also serious agitation or full of rage we see as well. And also unbearable emotional or physical pain. Sometimes emotional and psychological problems manifest as physical pain. So that might be a warning sign as well. And this is all taken through the National Institute of Mental Health. And I'll just add that sometimes we see the flip side. So sometimes we see students who were extremely sad flip and feel better. And they're suddenly happy and full of life. And it's just a very quick turnaround that you're like, I wonder why that happened. And sometimes the research has suggested that that's because the person has accepted that and committed to their plan and is feeling peace. So that might be another warning sign. Also changing behavior, such as making a plan or researching, withdrawing from friends, saying goodbye. So saying goodbye either through notes or blog posts or Facebook or Instagram or TikTok posts, saying goodbye, making amends, giving away items, or making a will. Taking dangerous risks, such as driving fast, using more drugs and alcohol, extreme mood swings, and eating or sleeping more or less are some warning signs. So look out for all of those things. And if you see any of those things in any friends, family members, children, make sure you approach them, ask them what's going on, ask them how they've been feeling, how you can support them. If you need to connect them to somebody that they can speak to who is objective, that can be helpful to have their feelings recognized and validated and addressed. Okay, so how does Prince George's County Public Schools support student mental health? And I'll just start this that some of the berries, we're not immune to some of the challenges in shortages. So we know that there is a national teacher shortage. There is also a shortage of mental health professionals, both in community agencies and in schools. So we do have some shortages in Prince George's County, but all schools are equipped with one or more mental health professionals to provide support. And we'll talk about who those individuals are specifically. We also have Administrative Procedure 2950, which is specific for crisis response. We also have evening counseling centers that offer resources to students, community resource centers. Mindula is a partnership that we have for suicide prevention. We're also rolling out Hazel Health for teletherapy in schools. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that might look like. And we are also rolling out this school year a mental health email address. So if you or your child is having difficulty accessing mental health support at school or in the community, you can send an email to mentalhealth@pgcps.org. And we will work hard to connect you to what your needs are, whether it's community-based support or school-based support. So the school-based mental health professionals that we have professional school counselors that are full-time at their designated schools. So they're there Monday to Friday, typical like a teacher schedule, and they just have the one school. School psychologists often have 2 or more schools. So they're often there, they can range from 1 day a week to 5 days a week, depending on the size of the school and the caseload of that particular psychologist. We also have mental health clinicians in schools. So we have partnered with 10 community agencies to provide mental health clinicians to, I believe it's 168 schools at this time. And by next year, we will have all schools with a designated mental health clinician, as well as an extra point of mental health support. Pupil personnel workers work in the county to provide wraparound services and to connect students with community-based resources. So they are experts in that. And they also work hard to focus on attendance. So they become involved when a student's mental health might affect them from coming to school and provide support through that. And school nurses are also imperative to mental health because often, as I said previously, mental health concerns and psychological complaints often manifest as things like stomach aches or headaches, so physical complaints that the school nurse might address. So these are the individuals that typically interface with students regarding mental health concerns specifically. However, I also want to recognize that teachers, administrators, custodians, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, really anyone that interfaces with students on a regular basis plays a critical role in student mental health, because we know that that connection with a trusted adult is key to mental health. So I do want to recognize that everyone has a role in mental health, and everyone provides support in the school, from teachers to support staff. Administrator Procedure 2950, the purpose is to ensure effective utilization of school-based and non-school-based personnel when a crisis occurs in a school. So we do have a crisis response team that responds when something occurs that would significantly impact the school community, such as the death of a student or a staff member, as well as suicidal ideation or attempts, community violence, or any other type of traumatic event that might impact the school functioning. So from the mental health side, the key portions of that apply to suicidal ideation include a risk assessment. So mental health professionals are trained in assessing student risk for suicide through asking about those questions from earlier about feelings of hopelessness, if the student has made a plan, how much have they contemplated this, how much stress are they in, and what does that safety plan need to look like for that student. Part of the components for the crisis reference guide are parent and guardian communication, making sure that parents and guardians are aware of the student's suicidal thoughts and comments, and making sure that they have access to community resource and they have a plan for when the student goes home and resources that they can access should the student continue to have these concerns at home, as well as a support plan from the school end and follow-up, which might look like weekly counseling, daily check-ins, whatever the individual student needs to be safe and supported in their mental health. So those are the key components related to suicidal ideation. There are also components related to grief counseling if there is the death of a staff member or a student that we provide through Administrative Procedure 2950. So that involves often designating more mental health professionals to that particular school that's going through that crisis so that all students that need that support can get that support. And then we have a new partnership in Prince George's County Public Schools. We are very excited to partner with the Department of Health and Hazel Health to provide teletherapy to help students cope with what they're feeling and bridge the gap until local services can become available. So this will be provided at no costs, and for some students, sessions will be available at home or at school. And they can offer compassionate, culturally competent, and multilingual care to help students with a wide range of mental health concerns. So we are still in the launching phase. We are still planning what the rollout is going to look like in Prince George's County, but we are very excited about this partnership, and we're looking at starting phases in November and December. But in the meantime, if you have any questions about what Hazel Health might look like at your child's school, you can contact the school counselor or administrator for more information about that. But please know that we're still working to roll this out, but this will be an option that's available to some PGCPS students. We've also put together a resource guide for you, so you can scan this QR code, or I've put the link here. I can also put the link in the chat at the end of the presentation, but I'll just click on it real quick so you can see. And I'll put this up at the end as well. So we have Prince George's County Public Schools resources, some informational resources from national agencies, emergency hotlines. And I just want to note this suicide prevention lifeline 988. If you dial this, it will likely route you to Prince George's County agencies that are partners with the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And also for Maryland Community Resources, you can dial 211. For students, there's also a suicide lifeline chat and a crisis text line, because we know a lot of times teens don't like to call and talk to somebody. If they're more comfortable texting, there are trained crisis counselors at 741-741. And then we also have services through Prince George's County Youth Service Bureaus. So we have those in Bowie, College Park, District Heights, Greenbelt, and Laurel that you have linked there. Okay. So now we can open up to our panel discussion. We are very, very excited to have multiple people on our panel. It's very diverse in terms of Prince George's County Public School employees and community partners, people that directly work with students and students themselves. So we have Dr. Elizabeth Faison, the Associate Superintendent of Student Services. Audrey Sykes is a school psychologist and crisis team leader for Prince George's County Public Schools. We have Richard Moody, the Supervisor of Student Engagement and School Support. We also have SGA student panelists. I'm so excited that Irene Diane from Bowie High School is able to join us, as well as Gabriel Wilkerson from Surrattsville High School, Amber Dutton from Hazel Health, Shaniqua Key from AprilMay, that's one of our partners that provides mental health services in Prince George's County Public Schools. And I did forget to mention, so we have 10 partners, and AprilMay is one of those partners. So she works at Catherine T. Reed Elementary School in the county. Wendy Wilcox from Bowie Youth and Family Services, Maria Velasco, mental health clinician from Maryland Family Resources, and Lisa Larrabee, mental health clinician from Maryland Family Resources as well. So thank you all so much for joining us this evening. I will stop sharing my screen for now so we can get to the panel discussion. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to panelists. Thank you for parents, guardians, students who are here having this discussion with us. We have prepared some questions and hopefully we will get to some questions that you have in the chat. So the first question goes to our student panelists. What do students wish their parents knew about supporting their mental health? So Gabriel and Irene, if you want to answer that for us to have your perspective.
Okay, so what students wish their parents knew about mental health? I think I would say that it's not as complicated as they believe it is. If you know your child, you pay attention to them, it'll be easier to notice the signs. All you have to do is make a very comforting environment. Make sure this child knows, I'm your parent. I'm here to provide for you and to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do. But also, I care about if you're doing well. I care about if you're feeling okay. I care about if you're stressed. I care about those type of things. So you just have to make it very clear to your child that like their mental health matters. And that can, I think, dissuade some issues.
Agreed, Gabriel. And I think another important thing to mention is that if your child is having trouble with their mental health, it is not a direct indication that parents are doing something wrong. I think that for a lot of parents, you may have the feeling like, oh, if my child is feeling a certain way, that might be a reflection of something that I'm doing. No, that is not always the case. I think it's important to have a conversation with the child and to have continuous dialogue about how they're feeling, noticing the signs, as Gabriel mentioned, and also doing a lot more listening instead of acting. Make sure you listen to your child first and really try to understand what they need before you act instead of acting and then asking questions later. It's really important for students to make sure that their needs are being accommodated for so that they can grow and hopefully their mental health can improve.
Thank you so much. Those are amazing answers, really opening up the conversation and providing a comforting environment for our children. And yeah, one of the misconceptions is that mental illness is the parent's fault, and that's simply not true. So thank you so much, Irene, for reiterating that. Definitely appreciate that. The next question. So if my child is having a mental health challenge in school, how can I connect with services that are available through Prince George's County Public Schools?
So as referenced earlier, there are a number of mental health professionals in our schools. And Emily referenced our school counselors, our psychologists, as well as clinicians. That will be in 168 of our schools. If your school does not have a mental health clinician, more than likely we have a counselor in the building or a psychologist. And what I would recommend is to let your teacher know that you would like to receive counseling services. And you can go directly to the counseling office and to make an appointment to be seen with the counselor or the therapist or psychologist. And as Emily referenced, as Pascal referenced, if you have mental health questions and there's no one in your building that you can ask those questions to, we do have an email address that you can utilize. It is, again, mentalhealth@pgcps.org. There is another mental health resource by way of Hazel Telehealth. They will provide an overview of that service as well as how you can access that service a little later in our panel discussion. But our school system has been intentional about making sure that there is someone in the building who can provide mental health supports to you as a student. I would additionally say, which is little known, and we're really trying to get the word out about the fact that our superintendent has amended our attendance administrative procedure to ensure that every student can take one mental health day a semester. It is a day that you don't have to attend a doctor's appointment. You don't have to see a clinician that day. Just your parent simply sending an email or a note to your school administrator or your classroom teachers to let them know my student is taking a mental health day today. That absence will be excused, and all of the work that you miss or that your child missed that particular day can be made up. So again, our students, every single student can take one mental health day, just a day off to decompress, to relax, and to de-stress, one day a semester, just by ensuring that your parent sends a note to let the school know the reason you are absent. And then your teachers will enter an absence code of MH for mental health. That lets us know that that absence is to be excused for the student, and all of the work that is missed can be made up. The last thing I would say is that all of the resources that you're hearing about today are absolutely wonderful and are accessible. And what I would really recommend is utilizing the resources that will be conveyed today. They are only as good as they are utilized. They're only as beneficial as they are utilized. And so I would say to ensure that if there is a need for a student to receive counseling services, just like some have written that in the chat, to reach out, to send an email, as well as speak with your school counselor or send your child's principal an email, but reach out to a PGCPS employee or utilize that email address that was provided earlier, and services will be provided and coordinated. We also have a number of community partnerships and community agencies that assist us. And so we partner even beyond PGCPS to connect students and families to appropriate services. And so I hope that this provides just some general information around where you can access services. And we would like every single student that has a need to receive the services that are very necessary to support their mental health.
Thank you so much for that very detailed answer. And I think that segues great into our next question, which is when do you know that your child needs a mental health day?
One of our clinicians.
I'll answer. I was just thinking about mental health days. That's such a wonderful benefit that the school offers. You know, from where I sit, like you look at patterns, right? If I had mental health days at my school, I'd probably push the envelope and want to take 100. So yeah, and I know the school district only offers one, so that's good. You know, do you know for a fact that there's things going on in the student's life or in your child's life that would cause an unusual amount of stress or an unusual amount of panic, anxiety, depression? You would look at those sorts of things. You know, I don't know if there's also a bereavement policy, but like if there's somebody who passed away, they might need an extra day off to, you know, get back on their feet. You know, and then, you know, if the kid asks for the mental health day too, I think, you know your kid better than we do, but, you know, a lot of times if they ask for it, it might mean that there's something going on with them. And we know that kids, especially as they get older, they have a very rich world inside, and we know some of it, but, you know, at least I don't know all of it. So if they ask for it and it's not part of a pattern of avoiding responsibilities, I think, you know, they probably need it.
Thank you so much. Another question we had was about the specifics of evening counseling centers. So specifically, what students does it serve with regards to the type of issues, and where are they located, and how can parents access these services? Dr. Moody, if you want to answer that one.
Sure, I can address that. I can address that for you. The evening counseling centers actually opened as a response to a requirement that's in the Student Rights and Responsibilities Handbook. And most students know this. If you are caught with alcohol, tobacco, or drugs on your possession, if you are, or if you appear to be intoxicated under the influence, in a school, on school grounds, on a bus, then the Student Rights and Responsibility Handbook mandates that the student attend 2 to 4 counseling sessions that would help them with that issue. Again, the evening counseling sessions only go 2 to 4 sessions, so they are not treatment. Most of the times when students come through, it's not really any type of an addiction problem. It's wrong place, wrong time, bad decision-making, things like that. But if a student were assessed and the finding was, or it was determined that the student did have a substance abuse problem, that student could be referred to any number of agencies that are out there in the community. The evening counseling centers are located at Largo High School, Parkdale High School, and the Oxon Hill Staff Development Center. So they're only open 3 nights per week. Tuesday nights at Largo, Wednesday nights at Parkdale, and then Thursday nights here at the Oxon Hill Staff Development Center. The services are free, and they're free to any student in grades K through 12. Mostly we see adolescents, teenagers, high school students, middle school students, but occasionally we have seen an elementary school student. But again, please keep in mind that the centers are free. There is no charge. A lot of times parents opt to go to one of the agencies that's in the community. And those agencies do charge a fee. Sometimes it's a sliding scale. Sometimes it can be minimal, but it can also be very expensive. So we opened up the centers to parents that want to have the option of going to get the intervention and the counseling 2 to 4 times for free.
Thank you so much for that information. This next question for Ms. Shaniqua Key. What are some things that families can do to support their child's mental health?
Thanks, Emily. I think that's a great question. And Gabriel mentioned it as well when he was kind of discussing some ways that parents can be supportive to their children around mental health. But I think listening is probably one of the most powerful things we can do as parents to our children, listening to their needs, listening with empathy, listening with compassion, and listening to understand and not necessarily just to respond. I feel like a lot of our kids, and we discuss this with our students at CT Read, they feel unheard. They feel like their feelings are disregarded oftentimes, and like they don't have a voice, or as if their opinion doesn't matter. So showing up in that way, I think, can make a world of a difference for a lot of our kids. And then one of the parents, I believe they asked the question in the chat, what if your child doesn't want to talk? What can you do? I think giving them options. So sometimes they don't want to talk about, or sometimes they don't have the words to use to talk about how they're feeling or how they're experiencing their stressors. So give them options to express themselves creatively, whether that's drawing out their emotions, creating a story, create a playlist that expresses how they feel. Find different ways to meet your child where they're at, and identifying what might be going on in their world. And then lastly, I think another great suggestion is to model what you want to see. So be open with your children, to talk to them, have open conversations, create a routine around that. Emily, you mentioned practicing gratitude, so you can make that a daily practice at dinner time, 3 good things that happened today, but just creating that space for our children to talk about what's going on in their world, I think, is the best way we can support our children around their mental health.
Thank you so much. Those are all great and practical suggestions. Another question I have for you, Ms. Key, what are some of the stressors that students face now that their parents might not have experienced when they were growing up?
I think that's another great question because there's so many new and innovative things that are going on in the world today. And what a lot of you probably realize is that our kids, they're more on it and on top of these things than we are a lot of the times, especially when it comes to things like technology and social media. So I think that those are just two very obvious things that maybe weren't so as involved in growing up, or not even non-existent for the most part in our lives growing up, that our kids are being overwhelmed by a lot of the time. So just access, the internet has access to everything. So this is why we, we always talk about making sure that we're monitoring what our children are watching online and that we're observing the things that they are engaging with online, because the access can be good on one hand, but it can also be, harmful for, growing and developing minds. And then Emily also mentioned the pandemic, COVID-19, that was something completely new for all of us. So a lot of our children are just trying to stay afloat or catch up academically and socially. And there's still tons of research being done on how the pandemic and, essentially being isolated for so long has affected all of us mentally. So just keeping that in the forefront of our minds too on what are the after effects for our children and how are they processing all of that. And then another thing I also wanted to mention, because I see it so often in schools, are access to things like vape pens and like those nicotine pens and things like that I never saw or experienced growing up, that a lot of the kids are seeing, and they're being peer pressured into doing, and it's being promoted as healthy and cool and all of these things, but it also can be very harmful to them physically, socially, all of those things. So just being mindful of the access that our children have to these things.
Definitely. Thank you. And I've seen a couple parents in the chat asking about social media specifically, and that's, I think, a big one that, it offers a way for students to connect and to pursue specific interests and hobbies. So there can be some good that comes of that. But I think it's important to emphasize to our children to be mindful of how you feel when you're scrolling through, how you feel when you're seeing something from a specific account. Does this make me compare myself to this other person? Does this make me feel good about myself, or does this make me feel crummy about myself? So being mindful about social media usage, I think, is very, very important. And as Ms. Key said, monitoring and being aware of what students are looking at is imperative as well. So thank you so much. Another one to Miss Lisa Larrabee. What can parents do to mitigate suicide risk, and what are some things that can serve as protective factors to suicide risk?
Sure, thank you. I love the slide that you showed earlier. I thought that was very well presented. I would say for suicide risk, one of the biggest risks, unfortunately, is if there's been a recent suicide in the student's life. So an aunt, God forbid, or another student. We know that unfortunately, that does put people around that person at greater risk for an attempt as well. A lot of the signs of depression are also similar to the signs for suicide, abrupt mood changes or long-term deterioration of mood. So they slowly withdraw, or something traumatic happens, so they quickly withdraw. They don't enjoy things they used to enjoy. So they used to go to football all the time. Now they just don't want to be bothered. They withdraw from friends. They start talking about death. Some people just have a curiosity about death, so that doesn't always mean suicide. But if it's sort of out of character for them, you want to pay attention. And then, like you said earlier, Emily, sometimes it can swing the other way. Like people were depressed, but suddenly they get energized, or things seem to turn around. But they might be doing things to kind of, for lack of a better word, wrap up their affairs. I think the major protective factors are, having family where there's open conversation. Not you know, and we're all human. We all have bad moments in a family, but you know, trying to keep the door open for communication about feelings. I know that one thing that's hard in most families is dealing with anger, right? Because it's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to throw things or be disrespectful. So helping kids, like letting kids be angry, but also teaching them to communicate it in an effective way so they don't bottle it up. And also doing check-ins. How are you feeling? You look a little down recently. Is there something going on? And also paying attention to peer groups. Some peer groups may be more of a negative influence.
Thank you. And I love that the check-in specifics of telling explicitly what you see. You know, I've noticed you look a little down lately, to open up that conversation. Also, I'd like to add that research has suggested through interviewing people who have attempted suicide, that if someone had asked them directly, are you thinking about killing yourself? They would be relieved to open up that conversation. So it can be extremely powerful, also uncomfortable, to ask our children, are you thinking about killing yourself? But being direct and asking that question can serve as a significant protective barrier or a protective factor, because it opens up that conversation and it offers them an outlet that they wouldn't otherwise feel comfortable sharing with somebody. So just wanted to add that in. And if you're concerned, you might need to practice saying it to yourself alone in a quiet room before you ask it to your child. But that is one of the most powerful and immediate things that you can do if you think that your child is contemplating or considering suicide. So thank you so much, Lisa. Also, to add that does not, some people worry that would put the idea in a person's head, but that's simply not true. Youth know about suicide most of the time. Most of our adolescents know someone, unfortunately, that has died by suicide, whether it's in their immediate group or community, or if it's someone in the media that has. So there's no evidence that asking the question puts the idea in their head. Just opens up a dialogue, which is extremely important. Miss Audrey Sykes, how do I help my child in an emergency situation?
Good evening, and thank you for asking the question. We have a lot of resources in Prince George's County that are available to not just educators, but also parents and families outside of school, that can provide numerous ways that parents can help their children or help anyone in their family who may be experiencing a mental health crisis or an emergency situation. If there's an individual who has made an attempt to harm themselves or anyone else, first we want to determine if that person or if an individual may need medical attention. And then, of course, you can call 911 or seek medical assistance that way. There are also community resources that are listed on pgchealthzone.org that just provide a number of different behavioral and mental health resources for families in the county. Again, that's pgchealthzone.org. And then there is also a resource guide that was put together by Prince George's County Public Schools and the National Center for School Mental Health that provides a number of resources related to not just behavioral and mental health, but then also employment and housing for families, families who may be experiencing any sort of crisis or needing food banks, GED programs, or other community resources.
Thank you. And another question for you. What supports are available to students following a crisis, such as the death of a fellow student or a teacher?
In Prince George's County Public Schools, we have a crisis response team that is made up of trained mental health professionals across the county. Our team consists of school psychologists, professional school counselors, pupil personnel workers. We have a few mental health clinicians on our team also. We're all trained to provide grief and emotional support to a school community when they have experienced a loss. Our team consists of about 65 trained professionals, and we will go into schools and provide their administrative teams and their counseling teams with support, as well as provide support to students and staff throughout the day.
Thank you very much. So I know we've talked a lot about the resources that are available in Prince George's County Public Schools, but in the community and private mental health supports, Wendy, can you explain to us, how does the mental health system work? So how are outside community resources accessed?
Gotta unmute myself, sorry about that. Thank you. There are a number of different resources available outside the schools or in situations that aren't an emergency room visit. And the first thing that we suggest for people is to loop in their pediatricians, because often pediatricians can be sources of guidance. If people want to use their insurance, pediatricians are available or are aware of available resources that might connect with their insurances, but it's also important to be aware of the existence of youth service bureaus. And there are 5 of us in Prince George's County, in Bowie, College Park, District Heights, Greenbelt, and Laurel. We all serve the entire county, and we're all available for calls for people that either want to access direct services. We all provide low or no cost services. Bowie Youth and Family Services, for example, is free of charge. We also will provide crisis and referral information. So if you're not sure whether your child needs therapy or not, or you're not sure what kind of services you need, or if you're having an emergency, if it's a situation that isn't completely clear, one of our licensed therapists can talk you through that and help you connect to the services you need. Many of us are also in schools, so we can also help you collaborate with people that your kids might already be seeing in the school building.
Thank you. And can you explain a little bit about what families can do if they don't have insurance, and if there are low cost or no cost services that are available?
Yes, in fact, the school-based services are low or no cost, of course, but the youth service bureaus are also low or no cost. We don't require obviously families to use their insurance. There is not an income requirement. So, and that's the great thing, because you know, it helps fight the stigma of mental health issues. That anyone can use our services, and sometimes people run into their teachers or other people they know from their communities in our waiting rooms, and that's kind of a nice thing. We also, for specialized services like psychiatric services, depending on where you live, if you don't have insurance and you need those services, we can help connect you to resources so that everyone can get what they need to be safe.
Thank you so much. We're very lucky to have you in our community. We definitely appreciate all of your assistance and information. Amber, are there any virtual options for mental health services that will be available through Prince George's County Public Schools? And if so, can you talk a little bit about what those might look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned earlier, I'm with Hazel Health. And so we have a really phenomenal program that will be launching soon within the next month for you guys. We have what's called our HEART program, which stands for Hazel's Early Assessment, Response and Treatment. And so what this is 100% virtual services that can be offered either at the school or in the home. And so oftentimes our goal is to be early intervention. And so if you're uncertain, if your student maybe needs a long-term services or some of these wonderful supports that are in the community, our licensed providers may work with these students temporarily. And so it's as simple as being able to have either a self-referral or a referral put in through the school counselors often. And then you're signed up to be able to complete an intake assessment. And then we go into what's called our student assistance program. And so what that really looks like is about anywhere between 6 to 12 therapy sessions with the student. And so we act as a gap service to eliminate a lot of those barriers that we see in the community. So these services are at no cost to students. And again, we don't discriminate in terms of whether you have insurance or not, language barriers. We have very capable providers who are able to serve and meet your needs. And so oftentimes we'll collaborate with the supports that are already within your school to understand if it may be appropriate to receive a Hazel referral. And so again, our goal is to be able to limit a student being out of the class. And so again, that is one of our big pushes, is that, you know, we have iPads that are set up at the schools. Again, we definitely understand that some students are going to respond better to virtual therapy as opposed to being in person. So I was a school-based therapist as well, and I know that there was still a stigma around a student seeing me, you know, walking down the hall and coming to see me in the counseling office. And so this offers a different way that the therapist is on an iPad, but they're able to connect with them if this works better. And then the therapist is also able to identify maybe this student is more appropriate for in-person therapy services. And so we would then collaborate with the school and again, the community supports to ensure that those services are well received. And so that's just a little bit about our program and what we offer.
Thank you, appreciate that. And Maria, what are some of the language and cultural barriers to accessing mental health services? And how can families overcome those barriers?
Thank you, Emily, for raising this question. This is such an important topic in the mental health field and in PG County as well, as PG County is home to a significant number of culturally and language diverse families. You know, some language related barriers are the lack of access to interpretation services, as well as the, you know, discomfort felt when a vulnerable conversation is mediated by an interpreter. Although interpreters are an incredible resource and should be utilized 100% of the time when working with a non-native English speaker, the trust and the quality of a relationship is lost when there's a third person involved. And I think it is important to recognize this for families. You know, when thinking about cultural barriers, we think about the negative stigma associated with mental health that is deeply ingrained in our cultures. And thank you, Amber, for raising that. You know, working with an interpreter or service provider of the same background may raise the fear of being judged or the fear of that disclosures may not be kept confidential. There may also be, you know, some fear in discussing issues outside of the cultural or familial norm, like sex and gender identity, substance use issues, suicidality, spirituality, and faith identity. You know, it's also important to recognize that a lot of our communities have experienced trauma in the past when accessing public services. So how do we overcome these barriers, right? You know, first and foremost, in terms of speaking about like the language barrier, knowledge is power. You know, we need to know our rights. The Maryland Language Access Law requires that all agencies provide free interpretation services. This law also requires all agencies to translate important documents into your language, and it is your right to request an interpreter in any situation, even if you feel like you have a good understanding of the language. And in terms of culture, I do want to acknowledge that it takes an incredible amount of strength and courage to seek out help and to accept help. And, you know, having a problem, like we've heard, you know, tonight, and I'm really excited that we're having this conversation, having a problem or experiencing difficulty does not mean that there is something wrong with you or with your child. You know, like we heard from Emily during our presentation, while not everyone will experience mental illness, most of us will experience a varying degree of mental health difficulty, and it is okay, and it is our right to access help for those difficulties. You know, and the more we talk about mental health and continue to inform ourselves, the more we reduce that stigma. And we begin this difficult process of overcoming these barriers by continuing to attend opportunities like the one we had here tonight and learn new information to inform ourselves on the role of mental health in our children's lives and also in our lives. And with that said, I do want to give a shout out to everyone that took the time to be here tonight and to attend. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Maria. Those are all very important considerations for us to keep in mind when we service our students. So I definitely appreciate your input and your expertise in being a mental health provider. That wraps up the questions that we had for today. I know I saw Dr. Faison monitoring the chat. I don't know if you want to address anything else that was in the chat or ask our panelists any other questions, Dr. Faison.
One reoccurring question I've seen is about the presentation being available beyond today's session. So we have made this presentation a PDF. We've also uploaded it and provided the link in the chat box. We'll do so again for those of you who may have missed it so that you can review the presentation again. Additionally, we will ensure that this Zoom presentation is uploaded to our PGCPS YouTube channel so that you can actually review the presentation or, sit and review it with your child. Or other parents, if you are a clinician, that you can reuse this information because we want it utilized widely. So in looking at some of the questions that we've seen earlier, there was one question about grief counseling available in schools. And so I'll let Ms. Doreen Hogans speak to that as it relates to our school counselors.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Dr. Faison, and thank you, parents, for joining us and community members for joining us. And yes, there is absolutely grief counseling available in schools. Our professional school counselors have been trained in efforts to facilitate grief counseling for our students. And whether it be through a group instance where there are students who have experienced the death of a same relative, for example, pulling together students who have experienced the death of a parent, or students who have experienced the death of a sibling, or students who have experienced the death of a friend, and gathering those students together so that they can bond over shared experience and grow together, or individual counseling for those students who may not feel comfortable with being in a group of others, but still need proper guidance and be able to speak with their professional school counselor. So yes, there is absolutely grief counseling available. And one interesting question or great question that came up in the chat is, what if your child's school is not staffed with a professional school counselor? Please reach out to me, to my office, and we will make sure that your student receive the proper services as need be.
Thank you, Doreen. I see that there is particular interest in having this mental health session. Someone suggested doing it, having a monthly schedule for this presentation. And we agree with the need to provide additional information as early and as often as we possibly can. So thank you for the suggestion, because I do believe it informs our work according to what you as our parents need and our students. We know that there are some students on the line this afternoon and who are very interested in this topic and who need the information. So thank you very much for joining. So there's one question that says, we just spoke about language barrier. What about religious or religion as a barrier to counseling? Is there any barrier? Is there a clinician who wants to address that?
I'm open to addressing it, but I'm also humble, and I think it's a big question. So if someone wants to address it after I address it, I'm fine. Yeah, it's hard because as a clinician, we see the people who do want services. We don't see the people who don't want services when we work in a community. I have heard of different, it hasn't been specific to one specific religion, but I know different religious cultures and different houses of worship have different views of of mental health treatment for a whole host of reasons. Bad experiences with clinicians who don't understand their religion, who may say something about their religion isn't useful when it is useful for them. So there's a whole host of reasons, and I don't put all the fault on, you know, any particular house of worship, or, you know, a lot of the time it's a lack of competency on the mental health provider. You know, I do encourage people to talk to their imam or their pastor or their priest or whoever their religious head is, to explore, like, this is what I'm struggling with. This is something that is resolved through prayer or through worship practices. This is something that it's good to talk to an outside person for. You know, and then also, you know, within your community, see if there's other people who have overcome those problems. And, you know, I would never tell anyone to go against the core of their faith belief, but if it's not something where it's at that level, you know, you can always call a mental health provider. Like, you don't have to enroll and get meds, and you don't have to do all that. You can just call for a consultation. Most places provide a free consultation, and, you know, see if it makes sense. Does it resonate with your soul? And if it does, and, you know, everything lines up with your beliefs, then give it a try. And if it doesn't, you know, then, you know, I hope you find another way that's even more effective.
I was just going to piggyback, but Lisa, I think you answered that beautifully. And I think education goes a long way to destigmatize some of the beliefs that are attached to mental health and mental illness. So having these types of forums where we can have open discussions and conversations, I think is a great first step in that. And asking questions to explore you know, what your religion does say about mental health or receiving mental health, and how that might align or disalign with your beliefs. But again, open conversations and platforms like this are a great way to destigmatize that.
I also saw a question about employing religious leaders for counseling in schools. And so I would just speak to what our school system's regulations and standards are as it relates to Maryland State Department of Education. And so in order to provide counseling as a school counselor in our school system, our Maryland State Department of Education provides that criteria as to how you can be employed in a school to provide such counseling services. Additionally, we employ licensed clinicians or licensed social workers to provide additional clinical supports to students. And so we ensure that anyone providing such counseling services are credentialed according to the Maryland Department of Health or our Maryland State Department of Education. And so I wanted to address that. If you have additional questions and you haven't placed them in the chat, it is 7:43 and we have time for maybe one more question, or we have time for a wrap up by any of our panelists who have some last minute thoughts that they'd like to share with parents as we move to conclude our session in the next 2 or 3 minutes.
I see a question in the chat. How do we make the most of a mental health day for students? Any advice? And the one thing I can think of is have a conversation with your child. What is it that you think you need? What would make you feel better? Do you need rest? Maybe it's laying in bed all day. Maybe it's getting re-energized through going on a run with somebody. Really opening up a conversation and taking stock of what your body feels like. If you're exhausted, rest. If you're feeling a little bit down, a little bit anxious, maybe a workout would be a good outlet. Maybe you want to access that creative side to take your mind off of things, to do some kind of an art project. So really, I think it can look like whatever your child thinks that they need. And you can provide as much support or ideas as you think, but if you open up that conversation, you might find that they have a lot of good ideas about how they could spend that day that would be beneficial for them.
I'm seeing a question. Are there resources for parents who might be experiencing problems? And one of the things I want to point out is that with the youth service bureaus, we work with the entire family and we support the entire family. So if there's a parent having problem, we help parents as well as helping kids. Because just like teachers, parents can't pour from an empty cup either.
Thank you so much, Wendy. That's a great reminder for parents to access those supports as well, and to take care of their own mental health is critical. Thank you.
So it is 7:45, and we are really grateful for the rigorous conversation that we've been able to have tonight around supporting our students' mental health. Our students' mental health certainly matters. The fact that over 250 of you joined our session tonight lets us know that you believe students' mental health matters also. We're very grateful for the students who joined. We're grateful for the parents who joined. Our Chief of School Support and Leadership, Dr. Helen Coley, who joined us tonight. We're very grateful for her continued support as we roll out this work. We're very grateful for the board members who have joined tonight's discussion, and certainly our community agencies, our panelists, our PGCPS employees, and our educators. So our very next Wellness Wednesday session will be held February the 1st. It will be our third session, and we intend to continue this conversation about mental health matters. If there are particular mental health topics that you would like us to touch on, you may put that in the chat now, or you may email us at mentalhealth@pgcps.org, and we would love to take your recommendations into consideration. Without any further ado, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We will post this recorded session on our PGCPS YouTube channel. If you'll go to YouTube and put in PGCPS, you'll be able to pull up our school channel. It is the same channel where our board presentations are held, and you'll be able to access the session there. Again, we have sent the session through PDF to you. We'll make sure that that's also posted on our mental health website for you to access that as well. Until we meet you again or see you again on February 1 in this forum, please take care, be well.